church. Really beautiful music. Thank you so much to all the choir for your musical contributions today and every Sunday. We're in that time of the year called ordinary time. Sounds kind of blah, right? But it just means, in the order. We're kind of going through the order of the year now. And so it's a good time for a series, I think, a new series. And so I'd like to start a new series today. And my series will be on something maybe not so familiar to a lot of you. In the history of Reformed theology, our Presbyterian churches kind of come from this root of the Reformed tradition. And there's a kind of an acronym called TULIP. It doesn't have anything to do with flowers, but it's something you may have heard of. Some of you may know it by heart. If you went to Sunday school in a Presbyterian church when you were growing up, you probably had to memorize it sometime. But they're kind of things that are helpful for us to think about. They're not, maybe perhaps we can't say the heart of Reformed theology, our church's theology. That's really more about the sovereignty of God, God's lordship over our lives, and those solas that we talked about before, the Bible alone, grace alone, salvation alone from Jesus Christ, all those kind of things. But TULIP is kind of, you could say, the distinctive, kind of what makes our kind of churches a little different than some other kind of churches. So it's good to be aware of it and how those differences kind of compare and contrast with some other members of the Christian faiths and traditions. We're going to be talking about this TULIP thing, and to get us started out, just a few comments. For a while in the Reformed tradition, the only kind of Reformed thing you had was Calvinism, was kind of Calvin's sort of strand of theology. And then back in around the 1590s, a guy named Jacob Arminius, a Dutchman, started to kind of take exception to some of the points of Calvinism that were being taught in the churches, and he kind of came up with his own way of looking at things. And we call that Arminianism, or Arminian theology. Okay, so that's kind of the other side of the coin. And we'll be talking in the next few weeks, not really much today, but we'll be talking in the next few weeks about how, when we talk about something that we kind of hold and teach in our church, how it's different than what's held and taught in some other churches. It doesn't mean we're 100% right, they're 100% wrong. It's just kind of a different flavor of ice cream you might think of in some ways than what other Christians are looking at. But I hope you'll agree that they're important points to know about in our faith. Well, here are the 5 points, and they use this acronym TULIP as a good way to remember them, because in English it works really well. Each one of those letters corresponds to a topic that was a point of controversy when Arminius started teaching his Arminian theology. And by the way, there's a country named Armenia in the world. It has nothing to do with Armenian theology. So please don't go to Armenia and tell those people you don't like their theology, because they won't know what you're talking about. They have nothing to do. It's Jacob Arminius, so a big similarity there. But here are the 5 points: total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and the perseverance of the saints. The 5 points of Calvinism. And so you wouldn't be bored on this rainy day, I found someone who'd gotten real creative, and they made a catchy little tune on YouTube. And so I want to share this with you. The TULIP song. Pretty funny. I hope you'll enjoy it.
Total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance to the saints. Yeah. Total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance to the saints. Yeah. TULIP, 5 conscious of Calvinism, by grace and mercy, salvation is free, and according only to the will of God. TULIP, just 5 points of Calvinism. T is going total depravity, a result of the fall. It says no one does good, not even one. where sinners going through from day one. U is for unconditional elections, where salvation starts. Says God chooses those that He will save, but it's nothing but His own mercy and grace. L is for eliminating atonement in Christ death on the cross. And the elect would know from the foretalk again, and the same would go for the cause. I is for irresistible grace, so many draws will come to Him. P is for persevere to the same, for to pluck you from His hand. It's TULIP. TULIP. Five crosses of Calvinism, by grace and mercy. Salvation is free, it's according only to the will of our God. TULIP, just 5 points of Calvinism.
You sing that during Sunday school?
Yeah, isn't that catchy?
Yes, it is.
I dare you to try to forget it now.
Oh.
Tulip. It's just kind of funny, isn't it? Total depravity. It's you wouldn't think of those words as being set to music, but it's quite cute and creative. So our T today is what we're going to focus on, total depravity. Sounds like a big downer, so we're going to talk about depravity today. The letters are very easy to remember once you start to go through it, the TULIP, but the meaning is not always so easy to figure out, and I think a lot of people misunderstand this. I found as I did some research, there are a lot of people who are attacking Calvinism, and they're saying, this total depravity thing is awful. But if you really go back and really understand what it's trying to communicate, it's pretty, I think you'll agree, it's pretty much an accurate description of the world that we live in. When we were studying this in seminary, it was kind of funny because we were trying to memorize the tulip and getting tested on it and all that kind of stuff. And we'd meet each other in the hallway and say, "How you feeling today?" And the other guy would say, "Oh, I feel totally depraved today. How about you?" "Oh yeah, I'm feeling pretty depraved myself." It's just kind of like, it's not something you would think about being proud of or talking about, about yourself. But kind of funny. Well, the definition of depravity from Webster, unfortunately my paragraph there got a little small. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll just read it for you. A state of corruption due to original sin held in Calvinism to infect every part of a human's nature, and to make the natural person unable to know or obey God. We're not talking about saying that people are 100% evil. That would be pretty miserable, right? If everybody you met was 100% evil, we wouldn't last long, I'm thinking. But it basically means that this problem of sin affects all of who we are. It means that there's no part of us that's kind of insulated or protected from this infection of sin. And this may be a little bit different than some churches. They might tell you, well, your reasoning is still good, or follow your heart because your heart is led by the Holy Spirit and it's not affected by your sin. But I'm not so sure. I mean, when I look at the world, I see a lot of people following their heart into some pretty dark places. And I'm kind of more on the side that this total depravity thing is pretty much right on. It's talking about how we are completely affected by sin. Total depravity is known as some other things, maybe a little bit easier to understand. I've seen some theologians that talk about it as radical corruption. Radical not meaning, like nowadays, like radical, but meaning to the root, going all the way to the root. And I was thinking about that tree that we had right outside our sanctuary. I don't know if you remember, there was a big dead tree. People have been working on that tree for years. I think Calvin climbed up in there with a chainsaw one time and sawed some limbs off. Well, when I came last year, that thing was just chock full of termites. And it was so full of termites, like you could poke it with a screwdriver and the termites would come swarming out of it. It was pretty rough. And so we treated all the termites, we killed off all the termites. But we've been cutting that tree down a little by little over this year. And you can see, if you go out to the stump, you can see that it's hollow. The tree is just completely hollowed out because that infection of termites went all the way down to the roots of the tree. And so inside the stump, all the way down to the roots, it's all hollowed out because it had that infection of termites all the way to the roots. And that's really what total depravity is talking about. He's saying that the problem of sin is not something superficial. It's not something you can just clean off with a good shower, or can be quickly removed with a little plastic surgery or something like that. It goes all the way to the roots. It needs something extreme to deal with. My own preferred term is bad to the bone. Yeah, easy to remember, right? But not in the good sense. Not bad meaning good, but bad meaning bad, okay? We're bad to the bone, right? That infection of sin goes all the way to our bones. If you remember the psalm that we read this morning, Psalm 14, it said, all have turned away. You see, when someone's looking around and says, where's the good people in the world? You know, ever feel that way? Some days you look around and say, what happened to all the good people in this world, right? Psalm 14 says, all have turned away and become corrupt. No one does good, not even one. You look around the earth, you can't find one completely good person. Nobody gets a pass. We're not okay. We're not like that book, I'm okay, you're okay. There's nothing okay about us in our natural state. We are messed up. We are radically corrupt. We are bad to the bone. Well, if that was the end of the story, it'd be a pretty depressing story, right? But fortunately, this is just the beginning. The gospel is not bad news. The gospel is good news. Total depravity tells us there's no way you can save yourself, right? And it helps us understand why this world is such a mess, but we can't just end the story there, because that's the background to the narrative that we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks. God didn't want us depraved, radically corrupted, bad to the bone type people left alone to ruin the world, to ruin creation, to destroy each other, right? Luke chapter 4, verses 1 through 13 that we read reminds us that someone different came along, right? Since God saw that no one was good, he jumped into the picture, right? He intervened. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, down to us. And we read in Luke 4, verses 1 through 13, Satan came along when Jesus was weak, when Jesus was hungry. I mean, if I was out in the desert, in the wilderness, having fasted for all that time, and you offered me a loaf of bread, I probably would have worshipped whatever you would have told me to worship, right? But Jesus was different, right? Satan told him to bow down, he didn't bow down. Satan told him to compromise, he didn't compromise. Satan even quoted scripture to him, right? You can jump off because in your Bible it says the angels will lift you up and you won't even touch your foot against a stone. But Jesus didn't fall for it. He said, it's also written, don't put your Lord to the test. And the devil left him alone. Don't you wish sometimes the devil would leave you alone? The devil got so fed up with Jesus, he left him alone until a later time, right? So this is a reminder to us that Jesus doesn't give up. God doesn't give up on us, no matter how corrupt, no matter how damaged we may be. I want to tell you a true story about someone I know right along these lines. A guy about my age, someone I know personally. He was a pretty average guy in his 20s. He had his wild side and everything, but he was a pretty average guy. Maybe even above average. He was in a really good university. He came from a good family background, right? But he suffered a series of setbacks. A girl he really loved turned him down. He flunked out of school. Became an alcoholic. Right? Started to drink until drinking was pretty much the only thing he liked to do. He moved out into the countryside with some like-minded friends. Money wasn't a problem for him for a long time because he came from a really good family, right? So every time he'd drink up all his money and run out of money, he'd just ask mom and dad for more money, right? So that worked for a while, for a couple of years. But pretty soon, mom and dad realized that all their money was just going to, buy alcohol. So they cut him off. They cut off his money supply. And so then he started calling other family members. He started calling his sisters. He started calling his aunts and uncles. And it wasn't a problem that he'd call and ask for money. That wasn't the problem. The problem is that he'd call and ask for money at like 2 o'clock in the morning when he was totally drunk. He'd call collect. And by the end of the conversation, he was usually cursing them out as being horrible people for not supporting his alcohol habit. So it was a rough situation, and gradually a lot of the family members, some of the family members were Christian, they were praying for him, but this went on for like 20 years. And you can imagine, after a while, you start praying for this problem to just go away, right? Well, one day, his family got a call from one of his alcoholic friends that this guy was in big trouble. He'd been found passed out in an alley with no ID. Some people thought he was dead, and other people thought he was homeless, and then it turned out he had a brain aneurysm, something like a stroke. And his treatment was delayed while they were trying to find out who this guy was, if he was dead or alive, and all that kind of thing. And so the family got word, he was having some operations, but the prognosis didn't look good, and he might not be around that long, or he might end up spending the rest of his life, in a bed without being able to leave or function in any way. Well, a few weeks later, about a month or so later, I was able to go visit him personally, and we were all very surprised when we went into this hospital to find him not only out of bed, not only able to speak and interact with people, but walking around serving people coffee and tea, and trying to help them carry heavy bags and stuff. He was not only recovered, not 100%, but quite amazingly recovered after the damage that had been done through the accident. But his personality was changed in a lot of ways. He'd become a really caring person. Maybe that person was always down deep inside of him, but you just couldn't see it before. And he started going to church with us. And at one point while we were living in Korea, he became kind of the deacon. We didn't really have deacons or elders, but he kind of became the all-in-one deacon/elder of the little church that we were starting out there in Korea. He used to go in early to the church. It was a room that we shared with other groups, and he'd go in and he'd set up all these folding chairs so that people could sit down, and then he'd help collect the offering, and then he'd help count the offering at the end, and he'd tell us how many people had showed up for church that day. Just really an amazing transformation in that person. And it took us a while to figure out, maybe part of this was God's plan, This person was so messed up, and on a suicidal course, you could say. Taking himself right out of this world. And through this disaster that happened, God turned his life around. God gave him a new chance. Made him into something different. Transformed him. Right? And I think each one of us, if we are honest with ourselves, if we go back through our lives, each one of us have some kind of experience like that, where if left to our own devices, we would have gone way off the deep end, maybe right off the end of the earth. But God had a different plan. God put people in our lives, parents, teachers, Sunday school teachers, pastors, people to reach out to us, transform us. Or for some of us, God just reached out and grabbed us when we weren't paying attention to what we were doing. Right? Jesus is in the salvation business. That's what total depravity teaches us. People who aren't worth anyone's time, like us. God reaches out through Jesus Christ because he's in the salvation business. And we are people in need of a Savior. Let's pray. Gracious God, we are humbled by your word to us, by the reminder that deep down inside, in our nature, we're not the best people in the world. And if left alone without your presence, there probably wouldn't be much good in us at all. But we're so thankful for your grace, for your word to us, for the ways that you continue to work on each one of us. We thank you that you are in the salvation business, and that no matter how depraved, how broken we may be, you're not giving up on us. We thank you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.